I'll make one other point on the fiscal cliff. I mentioned I thought the campaign was over, but yesterday the president was in Michigan, and what looked like a campaign event to me, and it seemed to me the time might have been better spent here working on the fiscal cliff, but he was there. And by my way of thinking, he was doing two things. Number one, he was encouraging the people of Michigan to continue to deny working people the right to not have to pay union dues in order to get a job. And second, to continue to perpetuate a system that will keep our auto industry from being competitive enough to compete in the world marketplace. Michigan is today on the verge of becoming the 24th right to work state in the United States. The Senate and the House passed a bill in Michigan. Now they've passed it again today. I understand the governor is about to consider whether to sign it. And this is what it will do. It will ensure that employees in Michigan won't have to pay union dues in order to get or keep a job. The president said that Michigan legislators shouldn't be taking away your rights for bargaining for better wages or working conditions. That's what he said in Michigan. But Mr. President, no one's in passing a right-to-work law taking away workers' rights. It's actually giving them a new right, the right not to have to pay union dues in order to get or keep a job. Workers have the right to collectively bargain. Federal law has recognized that since the 1930s, but since 1947, the federal government has also said that states have the right to determine whether a state may have compulsory unionism. And so there, if Michigan goes the way of a right-to-work law, 24 states who've made that decision. The president also said that these right-to-work laws, and I'm quoting him now, have nothing to do with economics, everything to do with politics. I would respectfully disagree with that based upon my lifetime experience. 30 years ago, our state was the third poorest state. I was looking around for a way to increase family incomes, to get new jobs. So off I went to Japan to recruit Nissan. We had virtually no auto jobs in Tennessee at the time. They took a look at the United States, and a map of the United States at night shows that most of the people live in the east. Map with the lights on. Most of the people live in the east, and the center of the market's where you want to be if you're making big, heavy things. And the center of the market had moved toward the southeast, so Tennessee and Kentucky were more in the center than Michigan, really, or the places where autos have normally been made. So they looked aggressively at Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, but then they looked at something else. Every state north of us did not have a right-to-work law. They had a very different labor environment. And so Nissan came to Tennessee. They weren't the only one. General Motors and the United Auto Workers Partnership came to Tennessee with the Saturn plant. They still have an important General Motors plant there. They had a different labor environment there. The workers at the Saturn plant are members of the United Auto Workers, but it's a right-to-work state. And over the last 30 years, there are probably a dozen large assembly plants in the southeastern United States, thousands of suppliers. In our state, there are about 1,000 suppliers. And what has been the effect of the arrival of the auto industry in Tennessee, attracted, among other things, by our right-to-work law? 1/3 of our manufacturing jobs are auto jobs, and what's been the effect on the United States? It's kept in the United States a competitive environment where those who want to sell cars in the United States can make them in the United States. And if we hadn't had that competitive environment, my guess would be most of those cars would be made in Mexico or some other place around the world. If you don't believe me, read David Halberstam's book in 1987. It's a book called The Reckoning, about the American auto industry. And in Mr. Halberstam's words, the big three car makers, the United Auto Workers, had enjoyed setting wages, setting prices, got non-competitive. They laughed at these little Datsuns that Nissan was selling on the West Coast and these little Beetles that Volkswagen was selling in the United States in the 60s and the 70s. They ignored the warning of Mitt Romney's father, George Romney, the president of American Motors, who said there's nothing more vulnerable than entrenched success. He said that in the 60s, and what happened? The American automobile industry nearly collapsed. I believe what saved it as much as anything else was the right to work law, the existence of a competitive environment in the southeastern United States where workers could make cars efficiently, be paid well for their work, and make them here instead of in Japan. What President Carter said to me when I was governor of Tennessee was, governors, go to Japan, persuade them to make in the United States what they want to sell in the United States. And they did that, and they did well. In fact, the Nissan plant has, for year in and year out, been the most efficient and successful auto plant in North America. So the right to work law has been a lot about jobs, and it has made a difference in Tennessee. I'm not sure all the reasons why Michigan's had a difficult time with its economy lately, but perhaps that is one. And Michigan's right to adopt this law has been an important part of our law. I've literally grown up with it. I remember as a 7-year-old, Senator Taft arguing the Taft-Hartley law, or at least I heard my parents talk about it. Section 14B of the Taft-Hartley Act gave states the right to say that workers in a state didn't have to pay union dues to get a job. And then I very well remember Everett Dirksen's arguments on the Senate floor in the mid-60s. President Johnson, at the behest of union leaders, wanted to repeal the Taft-Hartley Act, the Section 14B. And Dirksen rose up against it. He says, it's the right of the state to do it if it so desires. If the governor signs the bill or if they override the governor's veto. That should be the prerogative in a country where the states and those who represented the states in the Constitutional Convention were safeguarded by that residual clause in the Constitution, upheld consistently by the Supreme Court. Now, finally, Mr. President, I could be, as a Tennessean, upset that Indiana and now Michigan appear to have adopted right-to-work laws. That puts us at less of a competitive advantage. I believe in states' rights. I believe states have the right to be wrong as well as the right to be right. And with all these Midwestern states having the right to be wrong and not having right-to-work laws, we've benefited enormously in our state by the arrival of the auto industries and other manufacturers. But for our country, as we exist over the next 20 or 30 years in a very competitive world where jobs can be anywhere, where things can be manufactured anywhere, we want at least those things that are going to be sold here to be made here. And having a right-to-work law, which permits the UAW and General Motors to have a partnership at one plant in Tennessee, and Nissan and Volkswagen to have a non-union plant at another place in Tennessee by vote of the employees, I would submit will make us a stronger, competitive country. It has everything to do with economics, and I wish that the president yesterday had spent his time on the fiscal cliff instead of going to Michigan and arguing in favor of denying workers their right not to pay union dues in order to get their right to not pay union dues in order to get a job, and efforts to keep our American automobile industry from being as competitive as it needs to be in order to compete in the world marketplace. I thank the President. I yield the floor.